Testing 1, 2. Oh, there we go. All right. So, thank you, folks, for. Sorry, I was kind of um, running around like crazy last minute here trying to get this live put together because we've been running around all day. I am coming to you from the mountains of Kazakhstan, and uh, I we got a lot to talk about today. But before we do that, please put where you're watching from in the chat because it helps the YouTube algorithm know that uh, lots of people are watching from all over the place. And I love to see where you're coming in from. So, and if you happen to be watching from Kazakhstan, I'd like to know it. Please post in the chat because uh, we've had several discussions with people over the last couple of days since we've been here where they've somehow it's come about that I have a YouTube channel and they look it up and they go, "Oh, wow, I'm going to subscribe to that." So I'd love to know if some of those people are actually watching tonight. So it is about 9:30 at night here in Kazakhstan. I think that puts us a good 11 hours ahead of, uh, well, no, 10 hours, maybe something like that, ahead of Eastern Standard Time. It's just after 12:30 there. So 9.5, whatever. Anyway, we're a long ways ahead of you, and that's why, again, I'm coming to you late at night over here. Not my best time of night to talk and think, but we'll make the best of it. Okay, so now today we're going to be talking about this upcoming summit, I guess you'd call it, that President Trump has laid on with Vladimir Putin. Now, all belief is that this summit is going to take place in Alaska. However, President Trump twice today in a press conference misspoke and said that he was going to Russia. And look, when you talk as much as Donald Trump does, you have to have some, grace with him because it's easy to make slip ups like that. But that's a pretty important detail. Uh, exactly where is President Trump going to meet with President Putin? Uh, I'm interested to know what you think about President Putin coming to the United States. So, personally, I think the best possible outcome would be as soon as President Putin's plane lands. Uh, well, other than a better outcome might be if the plane just disappeared somewhere. But if the plane landed in Anchorage and uh, FBI agents surrounded the plane and carried Vladimir Putin off in handcuffs and turned him over to the International Court of Justice. Something like that would be ideal, but that's not going to happen. That there's no way Trump would do that. There's no way Vladimir Putin would come to Alaska if he thought Trump was going to do that. So if you have a question, um, put it, just write it in the chat and I will get to them toward the end. Uh, so the moderators are pulling those out and putting them on a document for me. Uh, okay, so President Trump making this sort of slip up and twice saying that he was going to Russia uh, to meet with Vladimir Putin when actually he's going to Alaska to meet with Vladimir Putin actually got Russians, some Russians, pretty excited because, as you know, Alaska used to belong to Russia, and President Putin, I'm sorry, a lot of people in Russia would love to see Alaska become part of Russia again. As a matter of fact, this is something from uh, Preston Stewart's YouTube channel that he pointed out. Preston Stewart's videos are great. If look, I don't mind touting my competition. Preston Stewart, I think, could legitimately be called my competition in a way. But I'm telling you, I look up to that guy. He does a great job at breaking down what's going on in various conflicts around the globe. Uh, can try to make it a little bit louder. Let me see if I can make the sound louder. Anyway, Preston Stewart's a great guy. I've had him on the show before. And how about that? Is that better? Testing 1 2 1 2. Is that louder? I I juiced it up some more. Um, oh, I see what the problem is. I see the problem. Okay. It's trying to use my AirPod as a microphone. So you should get better sound now. Sorry about that. Sometimes it automatically switches over and I don't know. It doesn't tell me. Anyway, Preston Stewart is great. And he pointed out that there's a patch going around Russian military units that is, I got a picture of it here. It's got a picture of Russia and Alaska over there on the right. And this Russian language on here says, "We'll take it all." So there's that. We'll take it all. How do you feel about Russians saying they're going to retake Alaska? I'd say bring it. Good luck. Good luck, Russia. Talk about wishful thinking. That ain't going to happen. Not going to happen. But how would you feel if we were in a conflict with Russia and President Trump decided, I tell you what, Russia, if you'll stop invading us, if you'll stop, killing people in America, we'll just give you Alaska. How about that? In exchange for a ceasefire, we'll just hand over Alaska and you can have it back. How would you feel about America giving up Alaska just to get peace with Russia? That I personally, I don't feel like that would be a just peace if Russia attacked us and we were defending our country against Russia and they had taken like, half of Alaska or something. And President Trump just said, tell you what, just we want the killing to stop. So we'll just give you the rest of Alaska and you take that and be happy. That is essentially what President Trump is talking about doing with Ukraine. Russia has been attacking Ukraine for 3 years. For the last 2 years, they have really not made much in the way of gains. Very, very slight gains. And even just recently, over the last couple of days, there are some uh, rumors going around that Russia has broken through the lines in Ukraine. I say rumors because it's not being widely reported and it's not being corroborated even by Russia that they've broken through anywhere. We know, I'll show you here in a minute, that there's a great amount of fighting on the front lines between Russia and Ukraine. That Russia is amassing troops, and we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. But suffice it to say that Russia has not made huge gains in Ukraine in the last couple of years. And they have lost a profane amount of soldiers and equipment uh, trying to take over more of Ukraine. Now, they are probably ramping up right now the attacks on Ukraine for two reasons. First of all, uh, we're getting to be the end of the summer. They've got a couple of months left before it starts getting real cold in Ukraine. And the fall season in Ukraine is mud season. And it's just super muddy. It's rainy and it's ugly. And you can't travel off the roads at all. Even still, right now, they're not able to travel off the roads a whole lot. And Ukraine is holding its own because they have really put a ton of effort and resources into their drone corps. And they've got a drone corps now that is the envy of the world, really. They are absolutely hammering Russian troops as they come through. So if you watch some of the videos, which I can't show you here because YouTube would demonetize me, but if you watch some of those, um, my goodness, I would hate. I mean, if you're a Russian soldier, just you better not be buying any green bananas because the life expectancy of a Russian soldier on the front line is pretty low. They've gone now to these motorcycle attacks. So if they put everybody in one vehicle, then it takes one drone to take out one vehicle, and boom, and you kill all the guys in the vehicle, and that's it. Or if that vehicle hits a mine or whatever. But if you got a bunch of guys on motorcycles, then it takes a separate drone to hit each motorcycle. So it takes a lot more resources on the part of Ukraine. Plus, the motorcycles can go around some of the landmines. Those landmines they put out in the road are about the size of a dinner plate, and they're about that thick. And they have a pressure plate on top, so you drive over it and it goes off. And they just would, lay those out across the road. Well, if you're on a motorcycle, you can more easily miss those things. So that's their new tactic is, motorcycle assaults. But the problem is you can get where you're going very quickly, but when you do, how are you going to supply those guys? They don't even plan for that. Russia makes like almost no plans to support their troops if they do happen to break through the lines and get in, further into Ukraine. So then what that does is I'll show you. I have to show you Matt. But before I do that, uh, we need to say thank you to today's sponsor, Preserve Gold. Now, preservegold.com/hot zone is where you want to go to find out more about Preserve Gold. And look, in 2024, here's the thing gold uh, demand is surging, and not just from people who are uh, collecting it, not just from people who are stacking gold like you and I should be doing, but I'm talking about industrial demand. As a matter of fact, last year, industrial demand for gold grew by 7%. Now, that's 326 tons of gold more that's needed for electronics and computing. And electronics alone went up 9% year over year. So this is being driven by an expansion in AI and server computing and emerging technology like Wi-Fi 7 infrastructure. So that means that if the demand for gold is going up, then it's no wonder that gold is hitting all-time highs. Not only that, but gold is a very safe harbor in uncertain times. And if you uh, if ever there were uncertain times, I would say that's where we are right now. And I know it can be difficult to figure out how to invest in gold. And that's where the people at Preserve Gold come in. They will help you understand the process. They don't charge extra for that. And they don't have a bunch of hidden fees and anything like that. Just honest guidance when you call them or text the word Chuck to 50505. So I've been stacking gold for years and I trust Preserve Gold to keep it simple. So you should grab their free wealth guide by, again, texting Chuck to 50505. And don't wait for the next crisis. Do that right now, especially if you've got retirement money on the line that's invested in stocks or something like that. Okay. So thank you to our sponsors at Preserve Gold. Now, I want to play for you a video of President Trump and some of the things that he said in a press conference he gave today. I'm going to talk about that press conference a lot tonight. So I'm going to play you just a few sound bites from what he had to say. Take a listen.
I'm going to go and see the parameters. Now, I may leave and say good luck and that'll be the end. I may say this is not going to be settled. I mean, there are those that believe that Putin wanted all of Ukraine. I happen to be one of them, by the way. I think if it weren't for me, he would not be even talking to anybody else right now. But I'm going to meet with him. We're going to see what the parameters are. I'm then going to call up President Zelensky and the European leaders right after the meeting, yeah. And I'm going to tell them what kind of a deal. I'm not going to make a deal. It's not up to me to make a deal. I think a deal should be made for both. I think Russia has to get back into building their country. It's a massive country. I think they have 11 time zones, if you can believe it. But I got a call that they'd like to meet, and I'm going to see what they want to meet about. I'd like to see a ceasefire. I'd like to see the best deal that could be made for both parties. You know, it takes two to tango, right?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about this for a minute, and then we'll go back to that. Um, so far, President Trump is just talking. Um, if you listen to what he says, there's not really anything of substance in what he's saying. Obviously, everybody wants an outcome that is fair, at least for Ukraine. Uh, he's saying he wants an outcome that's fair for both parties. My question is, why should Russia get a fair shake? Because Russia started this war. Russia has been prosecuting this war. The the war didn't have to happen. Unfortunately, later in this press briefing, President Trump kind of insinuated that it was President Zelensky's fault that the war started. And my question is how? How do you how do you make that case that Zelensky was responsible for starting this war? Look, I saw Zelensky like 2 days before the war started and interviewed him. And I can tell you, he didn't think the war was about to start. He was telling his people, look, Russia does this from time to time. They build up forces on the border. They do training exercises and they try to threaten us and everything. And where the place where I interviewed him at was at a training event for first responders, how to respond to riots, fires, unrest, things like that, because they were expecting more that Russia would send agents provocateurs into their country to try to stir up unrest and things like China is doing in the United States right now and Qatar. That's more of what he was expecting before the war started. And when the war started, uh, could anybody try to make the case that Zelensky was happy and that that was what he wanted? I mean, it just doesn't stand to reason. So what President Trump said today was he was complaining a little bit about the fact that President Zelensky does not have the power to cede territory of Ukraine to an enemy. He doesn't have a power to make that kind of deal. That sort of power is not vested in the presidency via the Constitution of Ukraine. And I have to say that makes sense. I mean, especially if you live next to Russia, and Russia has a history of influencing your political parties and actually has had Putin puppets serving as president of Ukraine before, it would be a good thing that they would put that into the Constitution. So President Zelensky has said, look, we're very tired of war. We realize that we're going to have some kind of negotiated settlement, that this war of attrition is just not good. Our economy is in shambles. Our cities are being bombed every single night. We're losing civilians. Putin is killing civilians every day in Ukraine. He and so about 80+% of the people in Ukraine would like to see the war end through some sort of negotiated settlement. And if there's going to be a negotiated settlement, Putin is going to demand to be able to keep parts of Ukraine. Now, I have to caveat all this by saying I don't think Putin is serious at all in any way, shape, or form about negotiating a peace deal. I think President Putin is playing President Trump like a fiddle because President Trump got mad at Putin when, of all people, his wife pointed out that Putin was bombing old folks' homes and maternity hospitals. And Trump acted like that was news to him. Like, what? That he actually said that. He said, yeah, my wife told me, well, he's bombing old folks' homes every other day. And I said, what? That's a direct quote from President Trump. Uh, so it makes me wonder, what are his advisors telling him about Ukraine, or are they telling him anything? Because anybody who followed the news even a little bit in Ukraine knows that Putin is bombing civilian targets, schools, hospitals, churches, uh, you name it, on a daily basis in Ukraine and has been for years. So for President Trump to act like he's surprised by that is very disconcerting to me, because that's something that the leader of the free world ought to know. And it's not like the information isn't out there. It should be pretty easy for him to get that information. So if he has to get it from his wife, we got a problem, folks. So anyway, he got mad when he found that out. And so he decided, okay, we're going to slap tariffs on Russia, not just on Russia, but on countries that do business with Russia that are helping pay Russia's bills. Now, if he was serious about that, now, first of all, that's a great idea. And kudos to President Trump for putting tariffs and secondary tariffs on people who do business with Russia so that they can squeeze the Russian economy that much more. That is the one thing that Putin fears. And so kudos for President Trump for coming up with that idea. However, if President Trump was serious about that, then some of those sanctions would be slapped on Europe as well, because Europe continues to buy oil from Russia. And some of those, instead of just hitting India and China, who are the two biggest purchasers of Russian oil now, he should be hitting uh, Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan is buying Russian oil and then reselling it to Europe. And I've done a podcast about that recently. He should be slapping tariffs on every single thing that comes or goes out of Russia, including semiconductors, and especially semiconductors, really, because they need some of those to build the weapons that they're bombing Ukraine with. Look, that was a very good idea. And President Putin did not want those sanctions to go into effect because even though India has continued to buy oil from Russia since the announcement of those tariffs, Russia is very worried that it's going to impact their bottom line because, uh, like I mentioned once before, every time the price of oil goes down $1, that affects the income stream of the government of Russia by about 4%. So if you can imagine, if President Trump went all in, the full Monty, on lowering oil prices, pump as much oil and gas as we can here in the United States, and encourage OPEC to raise their production and do everything we can to absolutely stifle the price of oil, even for just a short term. Number one, it's going to make everything cheaper for you and me. That's good. But number two, if you make the price of oil go down $10 a barrel, that's a 40% decline in the income stream of the government of Russia. That would be all over. It's all over but the crying at that point. And we wouldn't even have to keep it there very long. Max 6 months probably would do the trick. So anyway, President Trump was complaining that President Zelensky has to get a referendum in order to change the constitution uh, of Ukraine so that they can negotiate and give up sovereign Ukrainian territory. And it's not like, that's Zelensky's fault. That was in the Constitution before Zelensky became president. Zelensky didn't write that. So President Trump's like, hey, you're going to have to give up some land. And Zelensky's like, I can't. I have to have a referendum in order to do that. And President Trump was upset by that. So in this same press briefing, he said, I'm kind of upset with Zelensky. He says he needs, permission to trade away some of his land. He didn't need permission to start the war. And he's had no problems, killing all these people in the war. It's not Zelensky's fault. Zelensky did not start this war. If you believe that President Zelensky is at fault for this war, please stop watching me. Please unsubscribe and go somewhere else because you have been infected by Russian propaganda. And there's nothing I can say that's going to turn it around for you. Okay? Because you really have to be depraved to actually believe the Ukrainians are at fault here. The Ukrainians not only didn't want a war with Russia, they didn't have that much of a problem with Russia in the areas of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts before the war. A lot of people there spoke Russian. A lot of them still have family in Russia. Russia has committed something like 40,000 documented and proven war crimes. They continue to use banned poison gas on the front lines. They've kidnapped hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children who were not orphans, by the way, kidnapped them, either killed or just separated them from their parents, and then placed them as foster children with families all over Russia. Tell them, okay, you're Russian now. Some of those Ukrainian kids are now being sent to the front lines to fight their own countrymen. Now, I'm sorry, that's just evil. That is just evil. I had somebody send me a ridiculously long email today and sort of take me to task because I say things like that. Like, oh, that's evil. You're a journalist. You shouldn't be taking sides, No, look, I don't believe that. I believe that I should look at everything through the lens of right and wrong. And it's right to tell the truth, so I should tell you the truth about whatever I see. But this idea that journalists should remain neutral and above it, like, oh, I'm just going to watch, some African militants gang rape a bunch of little girls or something. And I'm just going to stand here and report on it and just tell you exactly what's happening, but not make it. No, listen, if you've seen what I had seen, what I've seen, if you have had been in as much war as I have been in, let me tell you something. There are times when it's time for me to put my camera down and just help somebody. And this happened. It's happened several times in my career, but it happened one notable time at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, up in Irpin, just on the outskirts of Kyiv. And we were there reporting on the people fleeing from the Russian army. We were right on the front line. There were dead bodies on the bridge in front of us from Russian snipers shooting them. And everybody was kind of hiding under the bridge and trying to get across the river because the bridge had been blown up. And they were trying to get across the river on these little wooden planks, like 2 by 12s that had been laid across the rubble of the bridge across the river to try to walk across on. And there were just thousands of people trying to get away from Russia because you end up staying in areas that Russia takes over. It's you might as well just hang it up because Russia is known for torturing, killing, pressing people into forced labor, raping, you name it. And so everybody was frantic to get out. There was an old folks home or like a wounded warrior, I don't know, something like that, home. And there were a bunch of people who were injured or very frail and old that were trying to get across that bridge and get out of there. And they needed help. And so the people were, maybe picking up some, an old lady and carrying her across or whatever. And I noticed a guy that had one leg and he was sitting on the far side of the river and he couldn't get across because he would have needed crutches. And the one good leg, he was missing a leg, but the one good leg he had somehow been broken. So he couldn't even stand. And another AP guy had actually carried him down to the water's edge, but that guy was gassed out and he was over there just gasping for breath. So he had put the old guy down, the one legged guy down. And look, that guy was not going to survive if he didn't get across that river. And I happened to be right there. So I put my camera away and I picked him up in a fireman's carry and I carried him across the river and up to the waiting ambulances on the other side. Somebody filmed that. Some other local Ukrainian journalist filmed some of that and then put the footage out. And when the footage got out, then everybody was like, "Oh yeah, Chuck Holton's," And I got two distinct camps. I got one camp, Chuck Holton's a hero for saving this guy's life. The other camp was, "You're a journalist. You should stay neutral and not take part in it. You're not. Yeah, the news isn't about you." Well, I wasn't trying to make the news about me, but I don't mean, call me a journalist if you want or not. But I'll tell you one thing: I wouldn't be a man if could just stand by and watch an innocent guy die because I have to stay neutral, so I can't help you. Sorry. No, not going to do it. Not going to do it. I believe in understanding my own biases and being very transparent about my biases so that you know where I'm coming from when I'm telling you about what's happening in the world. A lot of journalists will not tell you that. They'll try to put on this air like they're completely non-biased and neutral. But nobody is really non-biased and neutral. You can't be so. It's virtually impossible because you have a worldview through which you interpret the events around you. And if that worldview is, let's say, a depraved worldview or a leftist worldview, but I repeat myself, then you're going to see certain things as right and certain things as wrong, certain things as important and certain things as not important. And that's going to affect what you report. So even if you tell the exact truth, if you tell the truth as you see it, you can't help but introduce your biases in choosing what to tell the truth about, choosing what to talk about when you talk about the truth. And so integrity is saying, yes, I have biases. Here's what they are. And I'm going to do my best to tell you the truth through the lens that I interpret the world through, which is a biblical lens. And maybe you don't believe the Bible, but at the very least, you know where I'm coming from. I believe that certain things are right, certain things are wrong. What I think about those things doesn't make them right or wrong. I don't get to be the arbiter of truth. I just get to tell you what the truth is. Does that make sense? Okay. So I get kind of fired up about that because, it's like you just don't understand journalism if you really think that there are journalists out there who are just completely non biased. And if they are, I would say that that's evil. If you are so non biased that you could stand there and watch a child be raped and just report the truth of what is happening and not actually step in and do something about it, you are evil. So that's enough about that. Let's go on to more of what President Trump said.
Ultimately, I'll have a meeting next week. I had a great relationship with him, considering the fact that, I was not nice to him because of the pipeline. I ended the pipeline.
What's he talking about there? Which pipeline did he end? Um, I mean, they had the Nord Stream pipeline, and President Trump is he saying that he ended the Nord Stream pipeline? Pipeline? Well, that solves a mystery because everybody's been trying to figure out who blew it up. I guess it was President Trump that blew it up. I don't know what other pipeline he's talking about there.
I also gave the javelins. Do you ever hear of a javelin?
Do you ever hear of a javelin?
But I'm going to meet with President Putin, and we're going to see what he has in mind. And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders, and also to President Zelensky. I think, out of respect, I'll call him first.
That's nice of him to say. Now, he said before, look, it's not up to me to make a deal. I'm not the one that makes a deal. I'm not there to make a deal. Okay, so what are you there for? And it's true, President Trump cannot make a deal to end this war. So why is he meeting with Vladimir Putin? At the end of this, he says he'll know within the first couple of minutes whether or not a deal will be made. And that's right after he said that he couldn't make a deal. So I'm not sure what he exactly means by that. Take a listen.
And then I'll call them after. And I may say, lots of luck, keep fighting. Or I may say, we can make a deal. I will tell you this, I've seen.
Wait, we can make a deal. Now we can make a deal. He was saying before he can't make a deal, that the deal has to be between Zelensky and Putin. Now he's saying we can't make a deal. I just don't know what he's talking about. He's a deal maker, but it's not up to him. This is not something that President Trump has any sway over, really, except for against Ukraine. And again, just like we saw President Biden saying, oh, well, we support Israel, but then he would go behind Israel's back and give money to the Palestinian Authority or say or do things that supported the Palestinian cause and Hamas, like we need a two-state solution, stuff like that. And he would hold up aid to Israel. And we all roundly criticized President Biden for doing that. That's exactly what President Trump is doing to Ukraine, because as it turns out, if there are two parties that have to make a deal and you're trying to get them together, and one of those two parties is completely unreasonable, won't listen to reason, won't make any concessions whatsoever, and their whole thing is, yeah, we'll make a deal. The deal is we win, you lose. That's his position. Well, not much is going to happen there. And the only leverage you're going to be able to bring to bear is not going to be where it needs to be on the aggressor. It's going to be on the victim. And that's what President Trump seems to be doing. He seems to be attacking the victim once again.
Coming out of Ukraine, 88% of the people would like to see a deal made. And if you go back 3 years, everybody was gung ho for war. You know, everybody's gung ho for war until you have it.
Yeah, just to follow up on what you were saying there. First of all, Volodymyr Zelensky is not invited on Friday?
He wasn't a part of it. I would say he could go, but he's gone to a lot of meetings. You know, he's been there for 3.5 years, nothing happened.
And what is the definition?
I mean, do you want somebody that's been doing this for 3.5 years? What's the
So again, it seems like he's blaming Zelensky for the war not ending. What does he expect Zelensky to do? Surrender? That's what it sounds like. Huh. Zelensky's been fighting for 3.5 years, just killing people as if he's doing it for no reason, as if the Ukrainians are not fighting for their very survival. What else is Ukraine fighting for than the survival of their country, the literal survival of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian language? Because if Russia takes over Ukraine, there won't be any Ukrainian language anymore. The last time they controlled Ukraine, they outlawed the Ukrainian language. All of the cities and streets and everything got renamed with Russian names. That will happen again if Russia takes over Ukraine. Now, I hate to be critical of President Trump, but he's just not making sense here. Let's finish.
definition of a good deal? I'll tell you after I hear what the deal is,
I was gonna ask
because
you-
there could be many definitions. You know, you're talking about a very large and complex situation. Now, I tell you, the war that I just settled with, well, we're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin, and at the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be
How will
made.
you know that?
Well, I think that he's going to find out after a couple of minutes with Vladimir Putin that no deal can be made. Because according to intelligence reports from the battlefield on the front lines of Ukraine, Russia is not taking steps that are commensurate with somebody who's anticipating a peace deal. He is mobilizing more forces. He's strengthening his units on the front lines. He's increasing the number of attacks against Ukraine. He's pushing his troops forward in almost a desperate gambit to take over more territory, probably as a negotiating tactic. We see this whenever President Trump talks about a peace deal, trying to force a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. What happens is Russia steps up its attacks on Ukrainian civilians, throws tens of thousands of more troops into the front lines to try to cement some gains so that when they come to the negotiating table, if they come to the negotiating table, they will be able to say, okay, if the deal is we keep what we've already got, well, we just got a bunch more because we pushed real hard and took it over in the last minute. I can promise you, President President Putin has no interest whatsoever in a peace deal. There are a myriad number of reasons why he shouldn't be interested. He should just stop fighting and leave, is what he should do. But that's not likely to happen, because if he does leave, if he pulls his troops out of Russia, the Russian economy will collapse. And really, that's what it's going to take to end this war, is the collapse of the Russian economy. The Russian president has no problem sacrificing millions of his countrymen for his delusions of grandeur. No problem whatsoever. And he will continue to throw tens of thousands of men into the breach and get them killed he probably sleeps like a baby at night. Doesn't bother him one bit. That's just the price of doing business because he grew up in the Soviet Union. And the whole mindset of the Soviet Union was that you as a person don't matter. The only thing that matters is the state. And so if you have to die to serve the state, so be it. That's how they sent hundreds of what they called liquidators into Chernobyl after it melted down, knowing that those guys were getting lethal doses of radiation. And they didn't tell them that. They just told them, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go in here and you're going to work. You're going to do this, this, and this, and then you're going to come back out. And they didn't tell them about the radiation danger. They didn't care. Those guys died horrible deaths, hundreds of them. That is the mindset that Vladimir Putin has. So, with that in mind, Putin is not going to agree to anything with President Trump. He can't. I mean, he can't. Not only does President Trump not have anything to offer, except, well, if you stop fighting, we will lift the sanctions on you. You would think, I mean, if you were talking to a reasonable actor, that position would make sense. That would be a good negotiating tactic. Okay, we will bolster your economy if you stop killing your neighbors. That would make a lot of sense. The thing is, Vladimir Putin is not a rational actor. He's not. And it just it disappoints me greatly. It hurts me to see the United States being played by a Russian dictator and to watch the United States being played by an Azerbaijani dictator and watch the United States being played by Iranian dictators and watch the United States be played by North Korean dictators and watch the United States be played by Venezuelan dictator. I mean, we could just go on and on and on. The President Trump that I watched in that press briefing tonight looks to me like a guy who has no flipping idea what's going on. And that bugs me because I like a lot of the things that President Trump does. I'm glad he's our president. He's far better than the alternative, without a doubt. And I would hope for much more from the leader of our country. Now, I know that rubs some of you the wrong way, and I appreciate those of you who disagree with me, but continue to watch, not just, do your little swan song and then unsubscribe. I think it is a sign of great maturity and intelligence to be able to hold two things at the same time with your relationships. When you have relationships with somebody and say, well, I disagree vehemently with that person on this issue, but I still like them as a person. But I'm not willing to dissolve my relationship with them. I have a bunch of friends like that who we don't see eye to eye on everything, and that's okay. That's all right. So, we all like it when President Trump is plain spoken, straight to the point, doesn't beat around the bush, and doesn't engage in any form of political correctness. We all love that about President Trump. What I don't like is President Trump sounding like a politician. And that's what he sounded like in the press briefing today. I don't know what he thinks he can accomplish by meeting with President Putin, but I'm here to tell you, take this to the bank, hold me to this. Nothing positive for Ukraine is going to come out of a meeting between President Trump and President Putin. It's just not going to happen. All right, let's get to our questions. What are you doing, Nate? Okay. Let me see here. Let me move over to our questions. All right. Konkatz says, was Mr. Holton in Odessa when Russian speaking people were burned alive? That didn't happen. I mean, if anything like that happened, it was crime related and not ethnicity related. I spent a lot of time in Odessa. I spent a lot of time in Kherson and Mariupol and Dnipro and all around the front lines, okay, in the Donbass region before the war. And I can tell you there were tons of people who spoke Russian. Virtually in Odessa, especially, virtually everybody speaks Russian, even to this day. Now that's changing little by little, but so it wasn't strange in Odessa to run into somebody who spoke Russian. Everybody spoke Russian. And so the idea that, oh, somebody that was speaking Russian got burned alive, yeah, that if you saw that somewhere, send me that article, please. I'd like to see what you're talking about. Christina Mina says, what are the optics of Putin visiting Alaska? Well, they're not great for America. They certainly encourage Russia. And like I said, President Trump making the same mistake 2 times in that press conference of saying that he's going to Russia to meet with President Putin. It sounds like he's calling Alaska Russia, and the Russians love that. They're like, yes, President Trump he thinks Alaska is Russia too. Okay. Broski Bear says, I disagree that Russia started the war. Ukraine was shelling people in Donetsk, which is a very ethnic Russian city. It was the goal of McCain to instigate Russia. Okay, Broski Bear, let me just ask you this question. How much time have you spent in Ukraine? I would like an answer. Please put in the chat. I want to see Broski Bear answer my question. How much time have you spent in Ukraine, especially during this war? Have you ever been to Ukraine even once? Where did you hear that Ukraine was shelling people in Donetsk? Did you read it on the internet somewhere? Because let me tell you something. I was in Donetsk when the news articles were coming out from Russia Today, from Russian state media, saying Ukraine is shelling Russian-speaking people in Donetsk. I was in Donetsk when that happened. I was with Ukrainian forces when that happened. And the Ukrainian forces were not shelling the Russian-speaking people across the line in occupied Donetsk. I was less than a mile from the airport in Luhansk when it was reported in Russian media that Ukraine had bombed the airport. I was there when that supposedly happened. And let me tell you something. There were no explosions coming from the direction of the airport. Nothing. Let me tell you what was happening. Russian forces inside occupied Donetsk and Luhansk were shelling civilian areas inside Ukraine every single day that I was there. Matter of fact, I remember distinctly having a conversation with a Ukrainian, little beautiful Ukrainian babushka who lived with her son who was disabled. And she had a bomb land in her garden outside her house. Fortunately, her house was like 300 years old and made of stone. So it didn't blow her house up, but it blew her garden up. She was pretty upset about that, right outside her window. So Broski Bear, what you've read about Ukraine shelling Donetsk is absolute, unequivocal Russian propaganda. I can tell you that with absolute certainty because I was there. Okay? Now he asked, I'm going to skip down to the next question Broski Bear asked. Zelensky is destroying churches in Ukraine and putting men in their 60s on the front lines. He's a dictator now. Him and his crew are in it for the money. Okay. This is frustrating. This is frustrating. Thank you for being respectful, Broski Bear. Again, you're wrong. I've explained this many, many times. There are two kinds of, there are many churches in Ukraine. When I'm in Ukraine, I go to church, and the churches are not being destroyed. Actually, no churches that I know of have been destroyed except for the ones that Russia has bombed, like in Sumy, where they killed a bunch of people on Easter Sunday, right? There were Russian Orthodox churches and there were Ukrainian Orthodox churches in Russia. In Ukraine. And when the war started, Ukrainian intelligence services were driving around the country looking for saboteurs and looking for Russian spies that were in their country. And you know what they found? Whenever they got close to a Russian Orthodox church, they would start to pick up radio chatter that was going back to Russia saying, the Ukrainians have tanks over here. The Ukrainians are moving troops over there. Stuff like that. And those radio transmissions were emanating from the Russian Orthodox churches. As it turned out, Russia had replaced many of the clergy that ran those Russian Orthodox churches with FSB agents. And those FSB agents were taking advantage of, they were wearing the cloth, but they were actually spying for Russia. So President Zelensky shut down the Russian Orthodox churches in Ukraine. And unfortunately, Russia made them a valid military target. So he had every right to do so under international law. But he's not shutting down all the churches. The Ukrainian Orthodox churches are still open. The Baptist churches are still open. The evangelical churches are still open. The charismatic and Pentecostal churches are still open. How do I know? Because I've visited them all. As to the fact that men in their 60s are being put on the front lines, well, guess what? Ukraine is fighting a war of survival. They are trying to survive as a country.
I was in Ukraine and I didn't see guys getting.
My son Nathan was with me on my one of my last trips to Ukraine, and we didn't see any 60-year-olds. I saw some guys in their 50s probably that were out there, and a lot of young men, 20 or 30-year-olds, stuff like that. But they're drafting people. Yes, they're forcing them into the military to fight. That's what drafting people is. The United States did that in World War II and Korea and Vietnam. Some people say the United States ought to do that again. So are you making the point, Broski Bear, that drafting men when you're in a literal fight for the survival of your country is wrong? I don't think it is. So how does that make Zelensky a dictator? Doing what he must to try to save his country. As for him being in it for the money, Zelensky was a wealthy man before he became president. He was elected president because he's a Trump-like figure to the people in Ukraine. He had more than 90% approval rating. What's President Trump's approval rating? Now, his approval rating's not that high now. You wouldn't expect it to be after 3 years of war. But to say that he's in it for the money, if he wanted the money, he could have taken the money and run. He was offered a flight out of Ukraine on day one, and he decided to stay and fight instead. A lot of people, Russia puts out all this absolute propaganda that Zelensky is buying villas in the Mediterranean or someplace. All that stuff is absolutely false. It's just not true. Zelensky has lots of money. He's got plenty of money because he owned one of the largest media companies in Ukraine before the war, before he became a president. But he was elected by the people because he was not a politician. He was more like President Trump. He was an actor. President Trump was an actor. President Reagan was an actor. Governor Schwarzenegger was an actor. Hulk Hogan was an actor. All of these people, there are lots of actors that get elected to public office. Why is it all of a sudden evil if President Zelensky was an actor before he became a president? Okay. So, Lovely Lyrics says, do you think he's playing dumb and trying to make Putin think he's on his side? Let's hope. Let's hope. That's all I'll say. Kingdom Concert Promotion says, is this true? Iran and Russia unite to block the new U.S.-backed Trump corridor in Armenia and Azerbaijan. Okay, no, that's not true. Iran has directly threatened the new Trump corridor and said, we will not let that happen. They tried to get Russia involved, and Russia actually said, you know what, we're not taking a stance on that. We think it's a positive thing if there's peace in the Caucasus, because that's one less thing that Russia has to pay attention to. If Azerbaijan and Armenia are getting along, then that's one less problem for Russia. So, no, Russia was not involved in that, but Iran is saying that they would intervene militarily to stop that corridor from happening. We'll see what happens with that. I'd like to see him try. Truckee117 says, how can other countries make decisions for Ukraine to give up land? That's a rhetorical question, but that you're making a good point there. Lori W says, has President Trump given the okay to drill here in the U.S.? If not, what's he waiting for? Yes, he has given the okay to drill in the U.S. Broski Bear says, McCain and company literally established this Nazi regime in Ukraine. Oh my gosh. To instigate Russia, and they're getting what they asked for. Okay. Why do you say this is a Nazi regime? Here's the thing. Russia calls Ukrainians Nazis because in Russia, the term Nazi essentially means anybody who disagrees with the state of Russia. So if the state of Russia's policy is X and you disagree with that, then they call you a Nazi. That's what a Nazi means to Russians. Now, I've spent practically a year of my life in Ukraine at this point. And I can tell you, I've searched from one end of that country to the other. I've been out with the Azov battalion and I met their commanders. And I've yet to find a Nazi, like a legit, we hate people of other races. We hate Russian-speaking people. We hate, you know what might surprise you? The commander of the Azov battalion grew up speaking Russian. He was a Russian speaker, native Russian speaker, because he lived in that part of the country. In Ukraine, simply preferring to speak Russian over Ukrainian before the war wasn't a big deal. There were tons of people that spoke like that. As a matter of fact, I happen to know that when Zelensky and his buddies get together off duty, they speak to each other in Russian sometimes. At least they did, because Zelensky grew up speaking Russian as well. Okay, so no, there are no Nazis in, look, there are far more Nazis, actual, what you're thinking Nazis, like skinhead Nazis, neo-Nazi kind of people. There are far more of those in Russia than there are in Ukraine. I'm not saying there aren't any in Ukraine, but they are a minute fraction of the people in Ukraine. Again, Broski Bear, what you're telling me when you say things like that is you have not been to Ukraine. And so I'm not going to hold it against you. P. Cisneros says, hello, Chuck. I have a question. I heard you say the remaining hostages are all IDF soldiers. They are. Does that make a difference in their treatment because they're POWs and not civilians? Well, I don't think under the rules of war, it shouldn't make a difference in their treatment. But that's the reason why they were the last ones to be, they will be the last ones to be released. And they may never be released because they got out all the women, they got out all the civilians, and the only people left are male IDF soldiers. Okay. Concat says Russians blew up Nord Stream pipeline, the only one that sells gas to Germany. Well, we don't know exactly who blew it up. There are lots of theories on that. Some people say Ukraine did it. Some people say Russia did it. And some people say the United States did it under Joe Biden, which I don't think that was I don't think that actually was the case. But I think it's either Russia did it in order to create a kind of casus belli, or somebody affiliated to Ukraine or pro-Ukraine did it. Now, China has been doing a lot of stuff like that lately, and so it could have been China. Who knows? Broski Bear, I'm not going to answer any more of your questions because they're just ridiculous. Richard Short says, am I correct in saying that back many years ago, South American countries signed an agreement that stated that no borders will be changed from armed conflict? South American countries signed an agreement that stated no borders will be changed from armed conflict. I don't know what you mean by that. That is a tenet of NATO, and the United Nations has said that we will not recognize borders that are changed by force. NATO says that. I don't know about South America. Will Sim says, I've stated I don't always agree with what Chuck says, so if Russia had an equivalent to NATO and Canada or Mexico were wanting to join, what would you think America would do? Okay, Russia does have an equivalent to NATO. It's called the CSTO. And if Canada or Mexico wanted to join the CSTO, we would not be happy about it. We would not be justified in invading Canada or bombing Mexico, or especially Mexican civilians, because we were unhappy about it. We could stop trading with them. We could hike up the tariffs to stratospheric levels on them. There's lots of things we could do. We could sanction them, okay, if they were to do that. But it would not be justified for the United States to invade them and kill a bunch of their people because we're not happy with their foreign policy. Okay, that's best I can answer that. Dorian Romero says, how can Trump negotiate with Putin and concede things that Ukraine has not agreed to? Exactly. It's like he's forcing his will on Ukraine and by force making them concede to things they don't agree to. You're absolutely right. Broski Bear, most people in Ukraine believe that Zelensky is acting in the best interest of his people. There are an increasing number of people who don't believe that because they're tired of the war. But and you know what? Zelensky recently made a decision to consolidate several anti-corruption bodies into the office of the executive. And the people of Ukraine were outraged by that. And they went out in the streets and they protested. And you know what Zelensky did? He reversed the decision and put it back the way it was before. He listened to the people when they were upset with him, and he acted to fix the problem. How do you like that? Does that sound like a guy who is not acting in the best interest of his people? I don't know. Denise says, where is Chuck now? Chuck is in the mountains of Kazakhstan. And I want to show you real quick let's see. Oh gosh, we got a bunch more questions to get through. Let me hurry up through these questions, and then I got something really cool to show you at the end. Ellen McLean says, I do not think President Trump is being played. You're not understanding how he handles the press. Yeah, he's done this a lot. I happen to be one of those people who believe that words mean things. And if you say something, you should mean what you say. So if you say, we're going to take over the Panama Canal, especially if you're a leader of the most powerful military in the world, people should be able to take you seriously and say, okay, this is a big problem because they're going to retake the Panama Canal. Well, if you were just spouting off, we're going to retake the Panama Canal, and what you really meant was, we hope that Panama will make some concessions and stop doing so much business with China. Well, then that's what you should have said. I'm not of the belief. I don't agree with the tactic of anchoring where you throw it way out there. That works fine in business. If I'm looking to buy a building and the guy wants $600,000, if I'm going to make an offer on that building, I'm not going to offer 550. I'm going to offer 350 because that gives me some room to come up from there, and I'll probably get it for 450 or 400. Okay? That's great when you're doing real estate business. That's not great when you're doing foreign policy. So I do understand that Trump says a lot of things he doesn't mean. I just don't think that that's appropriate for the leader of our country. Lisa Beam says, don't you think there are backroom talks going on with Ukraine and Russia before the meeting on Friday? Probably so. But it doesn't change the fact that Ukraine cannot just ipso facto give up land that belongs to it, sovereign property. Why? Because it's not about the land, folks. It's about the people who live on that land. Imagine you've got a farm that's been in your family for 10 generations, and you've lived there your entire life. And all of a sudden, your government of your country just decides, we're going to give that over to Russia, to a dictatorial regime who will likely as not kill you and take your land. Would you not feel betrayed? You would be betrayed. That would be a betrayal. And so it shouldn't happen. Robert says, why the Putin bridge still standing? Ukraine still has some strange agreement not to destroy it. No, they've been striking that bridge. They've struck it, I think, 3 or 4 times already. And they've damaged it badly, but it's a very, very strongly built bridge. And they just haven't been able to bring enough ordnance to bear on that bridge, on the Kerch Strait Bridge, to destroy it. Sarah Jones says, are the Russian people culpable in this since they are lied to? Are they innocent in some degree as Ukrainian civilians? To some degree, they are. They only have access, many Russians only have access to Russian state media. So they're only getting the propaganda Russia's putting out. So if they are supporting Russia, it's because they're believing the news that they listen to. And I actually have talked to a whole bunch of Russians, even today. There are tons of Russians in Kazakhstan. As a matter of fact, there's about 25% of the people in Kazakhstan are Russian. And the language here is Russian. So, the language everybody uses is Russian. So everywhere we go, we're speaking Russian to people. We're sitting next to them on the ski lift. We're sitting next to them in the restaurant. We're in the elevator with them, and we're talking to a lot of people from Russia. And the ones that have left Russia are by and large the ones who have done the work to find the truth about the war and are not happy with it and are not wanting to be sent off to fight. So they are, they escaped. There's a ton of them in Armenia. There's a ton of them here in Kazakhstan and other places around the world as well. Diane Britson says, do you consider Palantir as evil intentions? Possibly. Excuse me, possibly, Denise. I'm sorry, Diane. What am I doing? What denomination are you, Chuck? Betts, I follow Christ. I don't get the luxury of choosing a denomination because I travel so much. I try to find a church wherever I go on Sundays, wherever I happen to be, and go to that church. So I've been to Orthodox churches, I've been to apostolic churches, I've been to charismatic churches, I grew up in a Baptist church, but I just tell people I follow Christ, and that's all. Jennifer Hargrove says, what did Biden do so much to help and support Zelensky and seem to be so against Putin? He gave Zelensky lots of arms, for sure. Robert H. says, uh, I don't know if it's been covered before I came on, but shortly, what is Trump doing to Turkey and India? Let's skip that. Let's stay on the topic here. Concast says, if the Alaska meeting goes wrong, is Trump going to turn his back to Ukraine, just like the Zelensky visit in the White House? And how will it affect the war? Could go either way. If Trump is swayed by Putin's blathering, then things might go badly for Ukraine. If Trump is not swayed by Putin's blathering, or if Putin just makes Trump angry again because he won't play ball, he just gives him the runaround, then it could go better for Ukraine. I I don't understand why President Trump is always bashing on Ukraine. It's not Ukraine's fault. Okay. Do you think Putin will actually show? Becky Snyder asks. Yeah, I think he will. Anna Marie Hernandez says, why is Shem the last? I don't know what you mean by that. Barefoot Believers Hawaii says, what about the NATO threat playing a part in starting the war? Well, Putin, look, if you live in a suburban neighborhood and you decide to paint your house a different color, your neighbors have every right to be upset because they don't like the color you painted your house. Let's say you paint it yellow. Your neighbors have every right to be upset you painted your house yellow. They have the right to report you to the city if they want to, if they think that they can get some satisfaction out of that. They have the right to try to take you to court to change your house back to a more neutral color if they want to. You can sue anybody for anything. What they don't have the right to do is come burn down your house. And so, NATO has standards. If you want to be a part of our North Atlantic Treaty Organization, here's the standards you have to meet. They're anti-corruption standards, they're military standards, they're different things. NATO is more a standards organization than anything else. And so if countries want to join NATO, and let's say Lithuania wants to join, Lithuania is a sovereign country. Does Russia have the right to dictate what Lithuania can and cannot do? If Lithuania says they want to join NATO and NATO will accept them, then why can't they join NATO? Russia does not have the right to force its neighbors to do what it wants. Now, it can encourage them highly by sanctions and tariffs and trade restrictions and all kinds of stuff like that. But invading them and bombing their civilian cities is not a legitimate method. Does that make sense? Eric Ryland says, where would Europe buy oil if they don't buy from Russia? Well, they could get it from the United States. They are trying to get it from Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan is actually laundering Russian oil to sell them. They could get it from Iraq. They could get it from Syria. They could get it from the Leviathan field in Israel if they wanted to. There's lots of places they could get oil from. I mean, heck, if they wanted to, they could get it from Venezuela or Guyana. Guyana is going to be like Dubai pretty soon. So there's lots of places they could get it. Or they could do the smart thing and they could restart their coal-fired power plants and their nuclear power plants and ramp up the production of electricity that way until the war is over. And then they can go back to their zero emissions garbage, all that stuff. That's fine. All right. So we've gone 20 minutes over here, pretty long, but we had a lot to get to. Now, For those of you that have actually stuck around and watched this whole thing, I have something cool to show you. And I need to see if I can find it. I think it's... We're on our way to Big Almaty Lake. We rented motorcycles to get up there, but they're electric. So I hope that the battery holds out, because it's a long way up that hill. So we'll see. Nathan's first time on a motorcycle. We had a great time renting these motorcycles and driving about, an hour up the mountain to this incredible lake. It's called Big Almaty Lake, and it changes colors depending on the sky. So we're riding on a ski lift, going up to Shimbolak Resort, which is at the top of these mountains up ahead. We've been having a really amazing day. We rode motorcycles and went up to Big Almaty Lake, and now we're kind of checking out what they have to offer over here at Shimbolak. It's absolutely beautiful. Look at those mountains behind me. Incredible. And from there, we're going to stay in a cabin and then take off towards Kyrgyzstan. So stay tuned. All right, folks. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you very much for watching. And I really appreciate all of you. Please go over to chuckholton.com if you don't mind. And you can sign up over there for lots of additional content that we're putting up every day, and my own kind of personal thoughts and feelings about things, various things, putting up pictures from our trip to Kazakhstan and a whole bunch of other stuff that you'll want to get. So go to chuckholton.com and become a supporter over there. It really helps us in every way to keep this thing a-rolling. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to our sponsor, Preserve Gold, and we'll see you next time.